Terrific.
All right, guys, welcome back to Musk Mondays. I am Chris. This is my partner Blake from Musk Miners. So today we're going to go over, so you want to build a mining farm. We're going to kind of lay out some variables you should consider and from the best of our knowledge. And yeah, let's get started.
Do we want to call this, so you want to buy a container for mining? Container or mining farm? So
you want to build a mining farm.
If we talk about a container, so many of the variables that go into deciding what container you're going to have also come into play about just building a mining farm in general, right?
Right.
So I feel like a container is a huge part of it, but you can also do infrastructure, facilities or facilities that are already either in existence, such as old paper mills, old factories, things like that. I hope you're recording. Perfect. Or you can also go with facilities that you build yourself, and you can design those with architecture that's really good for airflow. One of the good examples is referred to as a cathedral style building. Granted, we live up in the Midwest, so you have turkey farms and chicken coops. Well, they're not even coops, but they're very well ventilated, almost short, very long shoebox style buildings. And they have almost a triangle shaped arch on the top. And I know there's going to be engineers and architects out there that have a way better understanding of the lingo that I'm not hitting on the head. But those are also designed to vent out all of the gases that are generated from all of the, the biohazardous waste in that building. And if you can design a structure that's similar to that, you can almost funnel all of your heat from mining up to the top and either blow it out or suck it out. So that's just, you can either do that, like I said, to re-illustrate the container, find a facility that's already, established, that has good power. And that was that was the, paper mill, or, in our area, the grain handling spots, So I'm going to go back to that, and then you consider, to start overall with this whole process, I feel like we'd want to start selecting, where you're going to get your power, right? And everybody wants renewable power right now, but what the selection really comes down to is on-grid or off-grid power. On-grid is just going to be your fossil fuels, mainly supplemented with renewables. Granted, there are on-grid power supplies in the nation that are renewables. Nuclear is a great example of that. Nuclear power plants can supply on-grid whole infrastructures very, very well, but wind or solar is a little bit tougher, because when the wind's not blowing and the sun isn't shining, you're not generating like you need to. And so you supplement with those coals and those oils. And so that helps to really just keep that consistent, right? So if you're starting a mining farm and you want reliability and you want consistent uptime, you're probably going to look for that on-grid. Now, granted, the cons on that are your curtailments, meaning they might shut you off for a certain amount of time during the year, certain amount of time during the day. Those are hindering to profitability. Now, from a cost perspective, your on-grid power, because it's more reliable in many circumstances, is often going to be more expensive.
Right.
And the other thing about the cost on the on-grid power is, from a hierarchy standpoint, you have to consider there's generation entities out there, there's transmission entities out there, and there's distribution entities out there. Often, some of those entities do both or all of those things. Maybe they generate and they transmit. Well, if you start at the top of the hierarchy from where we're at in North Dakota, this is to the best of my knowledge, We have a very large coal plant in the state that has about a 1,200 megawatt supply of power. They generate power at this coal plant, and there's an entity at the top that basically says, okay, everybody, we made this coal, now we're going to distribute it. And there's also a sub-entity that says, okay, we're going to transmit the energy throughout the state, and then we're going to also sell that energy to a co-op. So each level that you take from the top down sells that power at a slight markup so that entity can make money. And by the time it goes from the top to the sub to the next sub, which is the co-op, to you in your house or wherever you're at, normally it's been marked up enough that it's pretty spendy, right? So when you go and you find a location that's industrial, normally you're looking to cut out one of those entities. Maybe you go right to the generation and transmission source, and they can offer you good power because you're pulling more than a megawatt, or you're pulling more than 3 or 10, right? That's been done before as well, because from a mining standpoint, not only are you pulling a lot of power, but you're pulling that power 365, 24 hours a day, right? That's a big deal. Normally a factory, say a John Deere factory, right, when they're producing tractors, or a GM factory or making cars, some of these factories will shut down at night. Maybe it's only for 4 hours, maybe it's only for 8 hours. Well, we never shut down, right? Shutdowns are a loss when that's just simple as that. When you shut down, you lose money. That can't happen. So from a consumer standpoint, and an energy generation standpoint, that relationship, it's kind of unprecedented. Like, there has never really been a consumer out there that's always pulling 365, 24/7. When a city goes to sleep, their consumption goes way down. Mining farms never go to sleep. A really, really cool fact, right? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's on grid, right? And then you go to off grid. Off grid is not as regulated. So an example of that would be natural gas, right? Natural gas wells, stranded gas wells, right? When you produce oil, they leave behind stranded gases that they can't use. And we can take those, generate them, or use generators to make electricity out of them and power mining operations at a pretty cheap cost. That's pretty good stuff, right? So that's one off-grid source. It's renewable from a carbon standpoint. Mm-hmm. And then the other one that I wanted to mention is a really cool one called gasification. And that's a very broad term, but in this instance, gasification is taking trash, whether that's railroad ties or yard clippings or biohazardous waste, and turning it into electricity. You combust it, and to a temperature that you can then generate energy. And I'm not going to sit here and get into the lingo because I don't understand it, but I know the process has merit to be able to generate energy. One of the first biggest mining operators in the States, and it's illustrated in the book, Bitcoin, Hard Money You Can't F With, and we're a family-friendly podcast, so I don't talk the F on, right? Check out the book. It talks about an individual back in, I think it was 2013, around there. He had a ability to burn tires and generate energy. So, because he's a freaking genius, he orders a plethora of miners from China and literally takes tires and turns it into Bitcoin. Like, that's awesome. Not only from a renewable standpoint, but from a future seeing standpoint. Like, that guy knew what he's doing, and I should know his name, but I don't. But really what it comes down to is finding how to do that more, right? So if we can do that with yard clippings or biohazardous waste, that's great. Is it reliable enough? Is it consistent enough? Is the quantity there of energy that's what research needs to find out, right? So yeah, I guess we can cut there, but go back to, that was me just going on spiel. So
That was
sorry.
awesome. No, that was good. Kind of laid out every electrical source people can use. I mean, on grid is obviously more consistent, probably a little safer, because I mean you're right there. You can everything's has to be UL certified for the most part, but when it comes to renewable, like burning like flare gas, I mean that's you're getting carbon tax write-offs for the most part by doing that while you're mining Bitcoin, and you can do it very mobilely. Like you just go from each site, whatever has available gas, and then you use a generator and hook it all up, and you're good to go for 6, 12, 18 months, whatever it may be. But yeah, the gasification could be very interesting in the next 10, 20 years. To be conservative, I mean, it could be great in the next 5 years, right? I mean, taking organic waste and just making it energy is incredible. So what type of location are we looking at?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a broad answer, right? And many of these variables are going to be a little bit broad, but our job is to just relay out the information that we've found so far. And so when considering a location, if you're pulling on-grid power, now on-grid power is what you'd find normally coming into your house, right? It's through your local power provider. That means that it's monitored by an entity that is like a MISO would be a good example of that. Just Google MISO power if you want to find out more about that. But what that does is it provides a pretty good amount of reliability and an understanding of where power is being distributed and how it's being distributed. So it's kind of a safer way of doing things from an on-grid perspective. Normally, if you're considering a location on grid, you'd call up your power company, and you'd give them basically an idea of what you're trying to accomplish, and whether that be you want to establish a container or you want to establish at a facility. You say, I have this container, and we'll just, for argument's sake, use a 1 megawatt container. Granted, a 1 megawatt container is pretty large, but still, it's a pretty easy example to roll with. 1 megawatt container can probably contain around 300 S19s, give or take 20, right? Depending on the design and the structure and ventilation. But that power company is going to look at you and say, we have a spot at this substation. Some entities, some companies will allow you to establish right at a substation with the right permits and land acquisition. Maybe you have to rent the land around that substation or lease the land from the power company. Maybe you have to talk to the landlord of the land around the substation and say, hey, I want to rent this so that I can set my container on it. The closer you get to the substation, the less you're going to have to pay for the length of your transmission lines to get that energy from that station to your container. So those are simple variables from that standpoint. But you also can go to your electric company and say, hey, I found this building, and maybe it's a building that's an old paper mill or an old grain refinery, and it has electrical infrastructure already established. We have a grain facility out here that's being sold right now that has two 4,000 amp panels sitting in it. Granted, it still works to haul grain, so it's a little bit of a disadvantage for us because we're still paying for that, facility's ability to haul grain, so it's a little too expensive. But that's a good example, right? And maybe you're not going that big, right? Maybe you found an old warehouse that used to be used for maybe welding or some kind of machine shop, and it has electrical infrastructure on site, and you call up that electrical distribution entity and say, how much can I get power for if I'm pulling over a megawatt, or I'm pulling over 500 kW, or I'm pulling over just 100 kW, right? Because 100 kW would be, right, approximately 100 L3s, or, I don't know, say 30 S19s. This is just all terrible math off the top of my head, so bear with me. But that's really what it's going to come down to is when you're deciding on that location, just understanding availability of electrical infrastructure at your location. And whether that means you have to bring in a container to house these miners, or you have to add transformers or electric panels at a building that you found that has cheap power. Those are all going to be considerations. But moving from the on-grid standpoint of things over to the off-grid standpoint of things, that's usually going to be a container. And you can establish off-grid power using natural gas, using a constructed building or something like that. But really, you commonly use containers because these containers are often built particular to a natural gas operation. If you get the right fabricator, shout out to Upstream Data. They do wonderful work on natural gas containers. They've been perfecting their design for a long time. So go look at what they have available and check them out. They're awesome, great people to work with. So, that was kind of a long answer, but really what it comes down to is just considering those variables, right? Container, facility, availability, and things like that.
Yeah, a lot relies on what the electrical companies have, right? Like, if their small towns have substations, but the local community doesn't want anything to do with crypto, or they don't have that much, power to pull, that's something you also want to consider, because maybe you can't build out. Like, maybe you can get 500 kW, but getting up to that 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt isn't possible in that location without you spending tons of money.
Exactly.
Because we've gotten quotes for anywhere from 20 to 100,000 per megawatt of electrical infrastructure, and that's a lot of money to be putting towards just electrical requirements. That's
not the container cost.
That's not a container,
right? That's excluding the container.
Yeah, that's just like your transformers,
and the machines,
your transmission lines, just that type of stuff, and it adds up really fast.
It does. And people don't. A common person doesn't have that kind of capital. Right. That's what the challenge is, right? You have to have money to make money. Right, but everybody knows that.
Slowly but surely, we'll get there. But yeah, if you're going off grid, it's also not as easy to find a location. You kind of have to go where they have the wells. But you're not dealing with that type of build out. The electrical transmissions lines, stuff like that. Maybe you have to lease a generator, or they have one for you. Or you're paying for the container, but either way, you'd probably have to pay for a container. So
maybe you need to bring your own transformer. Right, we've had that be a thing as well. Mm-hmm. Right,
and those aren't. That's $25,000 right there as well
for the transformer. Right. Yeah, absolutely. For what was that? So we got quoted. You get $25,000 for a 500 kVA or 750 kVA transformer. You have to go above the kW for your container. So if you have a 500, half a megawatt, 500 kW container, you're looking at a 750 kW transformer, because you have to assume the 80% efficiency rule, right? You can't max that thing out at 100%. So if you're pulling a 500 kW container, or if you're using a 500 kW container that's pulling 500 kW kilowatts of power, you can't assume that your transformer is going to be able to supply that 500 kW. You have to get 750 to be able to drop it down, right?
Yeah.
So that's just another consideration. Yeah,
and then maybe you need a disconnect.
Yeah. That just variables on variables and those
so
disconnects,
many
right?
Things that add up.
The switchback gear. Yep, absolutely. No, you're absolutely correct, and that's. Then you jump in. So you jump in, and honestly, guys, originally we considered doing this podcast on so you want to buy a container for mining, right? But then I mentioned to Chris, like, so if we're going to explain all the variables to buy a container, you almost want to explain all the variables to start a mining farm, because when you're considering the container that you're going to buy, all the variables that you're going to need for a mining farm come into play anyways, right? Like what source of power that you're going to have, what machines are you going to run, how many machines you're going to be able to run, the location for your operation, right? So it's like, you might as well just talk about a whole mining farm. And so I guess that's what we decided to do. But, jumping in further, talking about a container for mining, there's guys out there that are fabricating their own and doing very good work, right? The average Joe goes out there and he buys a shipping container that you see in the Chinese docks for 10 grand or 5 grand or whatever it is, and he cuts holes in the side of it, puts fans in it, intake, exhaust fans, louvers on the outside of the fans, and it works. And it works fine. Okay, it works fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. Just be safe. Don't do anything stupid, because you're playing with high power. I hope these are professionals doing this. Do your thing. But what I would recommend is go to the guys who have truly been through the ringer on this thing, right? Like, there's companies out there that have done really good work and have failed and have made the mistakes and understand where they need to fix things. We can provide a list, with this podcast for you guys to, check these guys out. They're awesome. There's a lot of awesome fabricators out there that will give you an understanding of, there's things that you don't think about. VFDs, very variable frequency devices to have your louvers open and close based on ambient air temperature, right? I mean, intake fans work great. Well, if it's cold outside or if it's hot outside, it's going to change the amount of air that you're going to want to bring into your container, right? So you have to understand that monitoring all of those variables are very, very important. And guys, one thing that I find very, very interesting is there's individuals out there that, and I've seen it, there's individuals out there that will buy $3 million worth of machines, right? They buy, say just 300 S19s at 10 grand a pop. Maybe that's overshooting it, but then they go out and they're hesitant to spend $150K on a professionally built, time-tested container. It's like taking a Ferrari engine and putting it into a 99 Civic. Like, could it be done? Like, sure, but don't you want to house that Ferrari engine in a beautiful space with that beautiful Ferrari body? And like, the thing about it is, that's what you're doing with your miners. Like, you're spending $3 million and you're sticking them in this basically house that can't provide them with the correct shelter, right? Because miners will go and they will purr right along. They will just work so well if you can keep them in the correct environmental conditions, if you can keep their temperatures consistent, if you can keep their temperatures in the range that you need them to, if you keep them cool and you keep the air nice and fresh, and obviously dust is a factor. So these guys that are making these professional containers, they're considering things like what kind of filters you're using, or MERV 8s, MERV 6, right? And some of these filters provide restriction on the airflow, right? So they have to test them back out. They have to change out the fans. Some of the guys have figured out that, a lot of people like security. So they give you the ability to change those filters from the outside, thus lessening the amount of people that ever walk through the container. Because when you have containers out here, a lot of these guys don't have the time or the need to want to go out and do it all themselves. So they hire it out, and they don't like having, random people walk through their container that has $3 million of miners, right? So that's a cool design, being able to change the filters from the outside, having a secure lock on the outside of your container, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get nearly the best container you can find, honestly. Like, you're putting so much money into these machines that, I mean, up here, if you get one bad storm, there goes everything. Literally everything that you've worked for, that you've bought. I mean, they're hard to insure, right? You know, that's something we're not willing to gamble with, and you probably shouldn't either. But yeah, I mean, spending an extra 20 to 50K on a very well designed container that can withstand negative 50 degrees to 100 degrees and keep your miners in that 15-degree range, like, it's a no-brainer on our side. But
true, it's absolutely true. I mean, and shout out to the guys who have been doing it professionally. Again, we'll provide a list, right, of the guys that are out there. But you know, really what it comes down to is just deciding if you're going to spend money on the miners, spend money on housing it. So guys, yeah, and the other thing too, I would consider, is obviously there's guys out there that don't have the ability to start at a 0.5 megawatt scale. We like to also think about the starters, right? And there's manufacturers out there that do great work by making just an 8-foot by 4-foot container, right? And that's 90 to 180 kW that can hold 64 S9s, right? Or 48 S19s, right? So like, when you consider starting somewhere small, if you wanted to start with an 8x4 container, that's probably going to run 10 to 15 grand.
yeah,
You could call up your electrical company and say, hey, where's your cheapest power? And then maybe find, in our area, it's a little different, but find a farmer with a field that has a transformer, maybe next to a drain tile, setup, or a green bin setup, and ask him if you can hook up to it. Because if you can hook up to a transformer that's already existed, you just saved yourself 25K approximately in capital that you needed to get that thing rolling, right? And so you can harness the power, because they can put a new meter in for you. You can harness the power that transformer is bringing down, and you'll be set to go.
Yeah,
right?
It's a win-win. I mean, the farmer's getting, some compensation for. I mean, he put the transformer out there and probably, isn't using it that often for drain tile. Or
a green bin, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they're harvesting once a year.
Pull, and you're paying them here and there a little bit, or maybe he wants to get into the mining, whatever. You can make that work, but it's a win-win that way.
A simple idea, right? And we've had guys that are not warm to the idea. Cryptocurrency is not exactly the most well accepted tech at the moment, but this is just ideas that we've come across that might help start someone up, right? And get people rolling. And that's a really cool thing, right? Like, getting the little guy going at a small amount of cost, because there's a lot of people out there with $100,000 budget, right? And so if you can get an 8x4 container that has potential to hold 48 miners, new gen, you don't have to buy 48 miners, right? You can spend, say you spend 30 to 40 grand with your container and your electrical infrastructure build out, and you find that transformer already existing, or you buy it yourself. Say you spend 50 grand. You can buy 5 S19s or 4 S19s, depending on the price, and put them in there and start making that ROI back on that 50 grand you use for infrastructure. And then all of a sudden, you can just keep rolling that money in, and your container, you just keep loading it up. And your container is professionally built. So hopefully it can endure the elements, right? But obviously it's not a one-stop shop. Keep an eye on the container. It's not just because it's professionally built doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but just some ideas, guys.
Yeah. And I mean, if you wanted to just throw in, some S9s, start mining that way, if you have really cheap electrical with the way Bitcoin's gone. I mean, the ROI is great on those machines. What is it? 3.5 months? 4 months?
Crazy.
Something like that.
It's if you can get them cheap. Yeah, absolutely. And cheap power, right? If you get above with S9s, you want to stick below that 6 cents around there.
Right.
And that's pushing it. When you get above that 7, you want to get a more efficient machine that earns more, probably that S19J or something like that. Yeah. But obviously you can't have as many, and you can't, the ROIs and the price of the S19J are around that 8 to 12 month range, closer to the 12-month range at this point. So, but you're getting a machine that's going to run 5 years, and it has a year warranty from Bitmain, right? S9s, that's not true, but those little things, they're bulletproof. I mean, they're not bulletproof, but they are time tested, right? Like they've kept in line. And so it's definitely just all the variables you have to consider. Put together an Excel spreadsheet, guys. Calculate the ROI that you're getting on these machines, the ROI that it's going to take for your build out of your container and your infrastructure costs, and call up your electricians, call up your electrical inspectors, put them to work, right? You get free quotes, free estimates from a lot of these companies. Don't be afraid to reach out. Some colleagues of ours, shout out to the Jimmies, awesome dudes. They what did Jimmy O said? Steve Jobs said it. A lot of people just don't call, right? A lot of people just don't call. So call up your power company, see if they'll give you a better rate. You just never know.
They're probably interested in it too. I mean, if you're telling them you're going to start a mining farm and need all this electrical, they'll probably gladly come out and be like, yeah, so I think this is what you're going to need if you're pulling out so much power. I mean, it's their job. They probably like it a little bit at least.
You'd hope so, right? Because you're the consumer, right? They're the salesman. They want you to consume their power.
Yeah. So.
But I mean, that being said, right, we have been turned off by some of them. Some of them have just straight up not answered our calls. Yeah. Like when we tell them what they're doing, what we're doing, some of them have looked at us and be like, what are you going to do? Just plop containers in the Walmart parking lot and have them make a bunch of noise? It's like, no, that's not our intention, right? We'd love to educate the community, right? We'd love to show people how to get into this. We'd love to involve everybody, because spread the wealth, right? Yeah. Spread the wealth.
I mean, if you're not going to mine, at least buy some, invest in it, a little bit, something, or anything helps. So,
true.
Long term for sure. But
long term, all day. Yeah. So,
our last little variable is, a lot of this stuff takes time. So I mean, you're spending 50 to 100 grand on electrical build outs. That all of that work that's going to be put in is going to take at least 3 months. Like, you're not looking at, you give them money, it's done in 2 weeks, you can hook up, have all your machines up and ready to go. And it's not how it works. And especially around here, I mean, we're getting to the colder months. Like, we're not even going to be able to, do a build out without paying double, because the ground's going to be frozen. I mean, that's, something you got to really consider when you're planning out, how long it's going to take. You got to do a lot of due diligence on that. But, and a container is about the same way, right? I mean, if you put in an order for an 8x4 right now, you'd probably get it in 11 weeks, 12 weeks.
10 to 12, that's what we're hearing, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, so that's nice that matches up, I guess. But, I mean, still, 3 months of mining, that could be a ton of money, and probably
a lot of foregone income.
Yeah. But, and then we have transformers, or 1 to 2 months, probably looking towards 2. It's more like 6 to 8 weeks, I think. Main disconnect's about the same. And then ASIC miners are about 2 weeks, and we can be your plug if you need. But yeah, usually those are about 2 weeks. So unless you're getting the L7, then that's, end of November, December is what we're looking at right now.
Yep. Well, for a shipping date, right?
Right. Yeah. That's Bitmain's estimated, what shipping date when they're going to be available. But
yeah, I would, I'm encouraging clients, if you pay for a November batch, plan for a December on date, right?
Right.
December, plan for a January on date, right? So
yeah, but those things are pulling in what, 150 a day, close to. If you have
crazy amount, man.
10-cent power, I mean that's nice.
That's crazy. They are extremely lucrative.
Yeah.
Real quick, one question we get a lot of is, will profitability drop on that L7 when everything's released? It's really hard to tell. You just don't know, right? Couple variables that are really going to have a big play on whether or not that's true. The first one is the price of Litecoin, right? If the price of Litecoin pushes, it's not going to matter if you have an increase in difficulty, because
Right.
if you have the increase in difficulty and Litecoin pushes high enough, you're still going to see the profitability. That being said, will Litecoin stay stagnant or remain lower, and a plethora of machines or terahashes or mega hashes go into, come online and increase difficulty and decrease rewards? That's very possible. There's no question it's possible. It's very, very hard to predict. I love conspiracy theories. I love to talk about, this is just, my kind of thought is, Bitmain could very well be running these things right now and we wouldn't know, right? They could have made them before and they're mining to get their input costs back.
Yeah.
I would. If I was Bitmain, I would. I mean, how much do you pay? How much in materials does it cost for one of these machines? $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, whatever it is. Their margins on them are crazy, but why not mine to get the input cost back in Bitcoin, right? And so for all we know, there's a plethora online right now, and we've seen that increase in difficulty. We've seen the increase that we think is already coming, or at least part of it, right? So then we don't see as drastic of a decrease in profitability when November and December rolls around. A lot of potential for a lot of different circumstances, a lot of different outcomes, right? So who knows?
Yeah. I mean, usually Litecoin follows the Bitcoin trend. So
Right.
you see Bitcoin pushing right now. Litecoin could be very well right behind.
Yep.
And I think it's sitting pretty low, to be honest. But, I'm biased. So, but, yeah. Well,
Cool. All right, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this.
yeah,
It's been fun.
We'll keep making videos for you guys. If you have any questions or you want to see something, a certain topic, learn a little bit more, let us know. We're open to anything. So, we're learning, you're learning. This is a great experience for both of us, and we're happy to have you guys along. But make sure to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and we'll see you next week for Musk Mondays.
Oh, check us out on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
Discord.
What else? Discord. Oh, we should start a Telegram group.
Yeah.
But
YouTube, we'll start going live probably once a week, you guys. We'll let you know more when that comes. But, all right.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
If you're some man